from the past year papers, and especially we have focused on the case laws. So today, as a guest organizer, we have with us Hemavathi S Shekhar. She is an advocate and founder at ENACT. So before we start our session, let me just introduce our today's expert. Hemavathi S Shekhar is a corporate environmental and climate change enthusiast. She started her career working as a legal research associate at Environment Support Group in Bangalore. Pursuant to the clearing net in 2018, she taught as an assistant professor in National Law University, Tamil Nadu, and recently she is doing some pro bono work at climate change. So we welcome you, and we are very excited to have you on this webinar, ma'am.
Thank you, Anu. Before I start off, thank you for having me here. Super excited. We're going to be doing a lot of previous year questions for international environmental law specifically, and we're going to try and identify how we can prepare ourselves and probably complete within this session, because it's a very small topic. Our preparation for international environmental law for UGC Net. So can I start sharing my screen?
Yes, ma'am, you can share your screen.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so before I start off, two important things that you will have to study in the context of international environmental law is, firstly, is the international environmental law principles, and then you have conventions, a couple of very important UN conventions that you'll have to deal with. But even before everything, there's one particular case that I would like to start with, which started at an international level, basically, the discussion about environment and laws. So we'll start off with this one particular question. We can time ourselves, give you all 1 minute to read, and then probably have answers in the chat box, and we'll go about it.
Right.
Anu, are you timing, or should I time?
Okay, I'll do that. We have to give 30 seconds more, right?
Yeah, let them take a minute to answer.
No problem. Okay, so you are reading the question, ma'am?
Oh, do you have to? Okay, cool. Sorry, I was just assuming everybody's going to read. Okay, which of the following principle is associated with the Smelter case? Option 1 is principle of sustainable development. Option 2 is no state has a right to use or permit the use of territory so as to cause injury by fumes in the territory of another. Third is redemption of damaged environment is a part of the process of sustainable development. Fourth is placing the duty on the state to hold environment resources in trust for the benefit of the public. This was a question that came in paper 3 of UGC Net in November 2017. Do we have any answers?
Please participate into this quiz. This is going to be a very important questions which we are providing. As of now, we have 4 attendees, Animesh, Neha, Vinita, and KS. Please try to attend these questions. Okay, so we have received one option as of now. So could you please tell me the correct answer?
Okay, the correct answer is 2, which is no state has the right to use or permit the use of its territory so as to cause injury by fumes in the territory of another. Okay, so before we start off, this is a very important case that you will have to remember. This is some case. A question about this has continually been repeated in almost every NET exam in one form or the other, especially match the following or something. So what happened in this case is basically this is between USA and Canada, and what USA did was Canada had this one particular smelting company in the city of Trail along with the Columbian River. And then what happened is that the pollution that was caused by this smelting company, the factory, went all the way and affected farmers in USA. So what USA did, it took Canada to court, and then it basically said, you violated our sovereignty, and then they wanted to discuss the principles of international environmental law. So what happened is because of the fumes, there were a lot of losses for the farmers, and then especially sulfur dioxide, which was released, led to injury of plant life, and the soil and the crop yields reduced in USA. So next, what happened is the tribunal came into existence. Initially, a commission was appointed, but at the end, in 1941, the judgment was given, and this was by virtue of an arbitration. So one thing you'll have to remember is if the question talks about whether it's a Stellar-Smelter case or it just mentions Stellar-Smelter arbitration, you'll have to understand that both these refer to the same case itself. So what this did is spoke about 2 important principles in international environmental law, is that of the transboundary harm and the polluter's pay principle. So we'll deal with a little bit of what these 2 principles means. Firstly, transboundary harm. What happens is, in the context of environment, whatever activities that take place, they usually happen within a particular jurisdiction. But these activities, as a country, one must ensure that they do not cause harm to anybody else in a different country. So in this is what has been laid down in the Stellar-Smelter case. It just talks about something called the no harm rule or transboundary environmental harm. My activities here in my particular country cannot cause any environmental harm in a different country. And this is also based on, one little Latin maxim, which is sic ut terror tuo ut alium non ledis. This basically says, use your own property in such a manner as not to injure that of another. Okay, so this is one very important principle that was spoken of in this. Here, in contextualizing in the context of the case, Canada, the activities of the Stellar-Smelter happened in Canada, but then farmers in USA got impacted. So that is why this principle was come up. So Canada had to pay and compensate for the losses that farmers incurred in USA because of its activities. Okay. Next, I'll just, since we're dealing with this, I probably thought we'll also deal with other principles that are mentioned here. The first one is sustainable development, and sustainable development was one of the very initial principles that came by in international environmental law, and this was defined initially. What is sustainable development? It is basically development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. So this definition was, it was come up in the year 1987. Brundtland Commission was appointed, and these in 1983 they came up with this particular definition. Okay, moving on. Okay, I'll go with the next question. There are two, like I said, we'll do a couple of principles and then we'll go to the conventions that deal with all these principles. Okay. Second question is you have to read assertion A and reason R and answer the following using the code given below. Assertion is redemption of damaged environment is part of the process of sustainable development, and as such, polluter is liable to pay the cost of the individual sufferers as well as the cost of reversing damaged ecology. Okay, polluters pay principle is a part of environmental jurisprudence in this country. This was a question in November 2017 again, and code 1, the first answer is both assertion and reason are correct, and the reason is the correct explanation of A. 2, both assertion and reason are correct, but however, reason are the correct explanation. 3, A is true, but R is false. 4, A is false, but R is true.
Right. So I've started 1 minute, and I would appreciate it if each one of you will answer to this particular question. And it's also a very recent question, like 2017 in the year that question was asked. So whosoever present as an attendee for this webinar, I would appreciate if you will answer. At least attempt. That will help you to understand that where you are lacking, and that will help you to understand certain other things as well. We have still 5 seconds and stop. Okay, we have received one answer from Animesh. Yes. Could you please reveal the correct answer?
It's 1.
Right.
Okay, so it basically talks about your assertion and reasoning, which is both A and R are correct, and R is the correct explanation. What happens is, at least in the context of environment, all the questions in UGC net sometimes overlap within with international environmental law and environmental law in India. So you'll have to look at how international environmental law is incorporated within our jurisdiction, to get like a wholesome view. Okay, now understanding what is polluter's pay principle. It's just basically like imposing a liability on somebody who is responsible for the pollution. Okay, as long as it does not matter whether they're doing it on purpose or they're negligent. It just says if you're responsible for pollution and there is environmental damage that is caused in written. So what happened, that person who's the polluter, he must pay for the compensation and ensure that whatever damage is done to the environment must return to its original state. Okay, there are two concepts. And one important thing is that this is added as a principle as a part of the Rio Declaration. I'm just going to look at two important aspects. If you read Principle 16, it says national authorities should endeavor to promote internalization of environmental costs and the use of economic instruments, taking into account the approach that the polluter should, in principle, bear the cost of the pollution with due regard to the public interest without distorting international trade and investment. So when they talk about bearing the cost of pollution, that is where we are looking at understanding this particular principle as polluter pay principle. When you study, in environmental law in the Indian context, there are a lot of judgments through which all these international environmental law principles has been adopted in our country, especially Supreme Court judgments. Okay, and then in this context, I'd also like to mention precautionary principle. I haven't found a lot of questions in the previous year question papers regarding this, but this is a very, very important principle as well. It just basically says, we take precaution. Whatever activities do are definitely going to have an impact on the environment. It could be any activity, as a matter of fact. But if you don't know in scientific terms what is going to happen, does not mean you don't take precaution. Okay, that is, in simple terms, basically scientific certainty is not required before taking any precautionary or preventative measures. Okay, this again has been codified under Principle 50 of the Rio Declaration. And then it is basically talking about, in order to protect the environment, the precautionary approach shall be widely applied by states according to their capabilities. Where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. And this is also looking at this in the context of environment impact assessment. This is why we do it. Every time we're coming up with a project, we do an environment impact assessment to look at how much damage is going to happen to the environment. So when you know if there probably might be a damage, does not mean you won't take precautions. Every activity needs to take precautions. Okay, can we go to the next question? Okay, third question is basically another one principle. I picked this up. This was in December 2019. One of the very few questions on environmental law, because last year they didn't have a lot of questions on environmental law. Okay, you'll have to match the following questions. In list 1, we have exemplary damages, evaluation of cleanliness of various fuels, public trust doctrine, right of each generation to benefit from past generation, and to preserve such heritage for the future. On list 2, we have MC Mehta versus Kamalnath. 2 is Sterlite Industries, Intergenerational Equity, and Burlal Committee.
All right, time has been started. 1 minute. Participants, find the right match and give your right option or attempt this question. "30 seconds more to go." We haven't received any answers from attendees as of now. 5 seconds to go. Okay, time's up.
Okay, the correct answer is 2, which is, okay, in this context, exemplary damages. This is something you'll be studying in environmental law, but then I was concentrating on intergenerational equity here. Anyways, answer is 2. A is Sterlite Industries, exemplary damages, and Sterlite Industries. Evaluation of cleanliness of various fuels is Burlal Committee. A committee was established for doing this evaluation. Public trust doctrine is MC Mehta versus Kamalnath, and right of each generation to benefit from the past generation and to preserve such heritage for future is intergenerational equity. Okay, now this is something something that has appeared over a period of time. Understanding intra and intergenerational equity. Now, equity in terms of access, it's basically talking about this. If the current generation just exploits all the natural resources and use it all up, okay, what are the future generations going to do? They're not going to have anything to use it, and we are basically depriving them of the right to use Earth's natural resources by overusing the resources right now. So we are basically looking at this, and this is one of the very important parts of sustainable development, because it basically says using the current generation's use should not impact the use of future generations. Now, when you talk about intra-generational, within our generation, there are people who have lesser access to resources, and then there are people who have higher access to resources. So when we're talking about within a particular generation, then if all of them belong to the same generation, we try to get equity in terms of access to resources at the same level for everybody. When you talk about intergenerational equity, that is between two generations. And then the present and the future generation, they must have equal ability to share their resources, and then there must be equity in terms of their access to resources. Okay? Okay, we have the next question. Which of the following is incorrect? Montreal Protocol is related to hazardous waste. The precautionary principle and the polluter's pay principle are essential features of principles of sustainable development. 3. The Stockholm Declaration of 1972 has been described as a Magna Carta of the environment. 4. No state has a right to use or permit the use of its territory so as to cause injury by fumes in the territory of another.
All right, your time has been started. Participants, you may take guesses, or you can at least try to attempt this particular question. It is the sole intention of this particular webinar or session, you could say, to just evaluate and boost your performance. So please try. 10 more seconds to go. 5 more seconds. And stop.
Okay, the answer is 1, which is Montreal Protocol is related to hazardous waste. Like we previously discussed, we know precautionary principle and polluter's pay principle, they're all again related to sustainable development. Option 4, we have no state has the right to use or permit the use of its territory. This is again principle of transboundary harm, both of them are correct. Stockholm Declaration, this is the very first international environmental convention where a lot of countries came together. So this is correct. The 4th one is Montreal Protocol. Sorry, the first option is related to hazardous waste, which is wrong because Montreal Protocol talks about ozone layer depletion, and the Convention on Hazardous Waste is the Basel Convention. We'll be dealing with this a little later in detail. Okay, now learning about the Stockholm Declaration. One important thing you'll have to keep in mind while studying for NET on these these aspects is the names of these conventions. A lot of people, for convenience, the Stockholm Declaration is called the UN Conference on Human Environment. Okay, but then we generally call it the Stockholm Declaration because it happened in Stockholm. So there are times when there might be a question on Stockholm Declaration, but then they won't say it's the Stockholm Declaration. They'll just call it the UN Conference on Human Environment. So you'll have to know what these are. And then this, this happened in 1972. And then it is called then Magna Carta for Environment Protection and its Development, because it's the first time on a global level an international forum was created to address global environmental challenges. Now, again, like we spoke, right now I'm doing the conferences. We have dealt with a couple of principles, polluter's pay, precautionary principle, transboundary harm. All these principles are codified in these environmental conferences, one after the other, in different manners. Okay, when we talk about these, the concept, do no injury, ensure that your activities don't harm others. It's been illustrated in Principle 21 and 22 of the Stockholm Declaration. Like if I read Principle 21, states have, in accordance with Charter of United Nations and the principles of international law, the sovereign right to exploit their own resources pursuant to their own environmental policies, and the responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of the natural jurisdiction. This was what was held in the Smelter case, right? Whatever happened in Canada should not impact people in the USA. This is again. Then this is about the polluter's pay principle. States shall cooperate to develop further the international law regarding liability and compensation for the victims of pollution and other environmental damage caused by activities within the jurisdiction or controls of such states to areas beyond their jurisdiction. It is a combination of polluter's pay principle as well as the principle of transboundary harm. So there are times when you'll have to just remember these principle numbers, so that you know that Principle 21 talks about transboundary harm and Principle 22 talks about polluter's pay principle. It becomes very important because they're not going to say the principle, they'll just give you the principle and say principle number in those match the following questions as well. So you'll have to remember these principles and they're very important. Okay, can we do another match the following? We have two of them here. We have a couple of things. I am hoping you can try answering because you already know the answer for one of them. Okay, on list one, we have National Environment Tribunal. The doctrine we spoke about the C is to stop and prevent the international traffic in dumping and resultant accumulation of toxic and dangerous products and waste. D, we have convention or climate change strengthened declarations. On list 2, we have the Basel Convention, Rio Declaration, Kyoto Protocol, and Principles 21 and 22 of Stockholm Declaration.
Okay, your time starts now. You have 1 minute to answer, participants. Seconds left. 5 seconds. Okay, time's up. We received one answer from Vinita.
Okay, the correct answer is option 3. 3 is 2413. Okay, the national environment, let's go with whatever information we have. This is what I personally do when it comes to match the following. Try to identify the one answer I already know for where you're sure. You know, that time it'll be easy. Even if you don't know, have information about the rest, if you can find that particular answer is unique to that list, then it might be easy for you. So we just spoke about principles 21 and 22 of Stockholm Declaration. And when I spoke about the doctrine of, principle of transboundary harm, I also mentioned this particular, doctrine. So in this particular case, B would be 4. So our option in this case, we have only one of them, so your answer would be 3. But ideally this would, this might not be the case when you have, like, there could be other options with options, 4, but this is just like being lucky. But otherwise, A, National Environmental Tribunal is Rio Declaration. Just giving you some context is that NGT, when it was established, the preamble referred to the Stockholm Declaration and the Rio Declaration and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution in its objectives. So that is how they're connecting this. B, we already know principles 22 and 21. And C, to stop and prevent the international traffic in dumping and resultant accumulation of toxic and dangerous products and waste. That is the Basel Convention. And then Convention on Climate Change Strengthened Declaration is the Kyoto Protocol. So we'll be doing a couple of these conventions right now so that we get like a basic idea of what they're about. Okay, firstly is the Rio Declaration. Ideally, try to remember all these conferences in an order. Firstly was the Stockholm Declaration, and after 20 years came in the Rio Declaration. In between was when the principle of sustainable development came in. The Brundtland Commission was appointed in 1983, and the report came in 1987, and they defined what sustainable development is. Now, again, like I mentioned, very important is the fact that you'll have to remember what is the actual name of these conventions. You'll be able to see there was one particular Rio Declaration, you might know what Rio Declaration talks about, but if you don't know that Earth Summit, Rio Declaration is also called the Earth Summit. And there could be articles from Rio Declaration, and on another list, they might mention Earth Summit instead of Rio Declaration. If, knowing this helps. So know all the names. Rio Declaration was also part of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, and it is also called the Earth Summit. Rio Declaration was a part of these, okay? So non-binding instruments, through this conference, 3 non-binding instruments came in: Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, Agenda 21, and Forestry Principles. On looking at the previous year question papers, they've only looked at Rio Declaration, so that has been very important. And this particular conference happened in Rio. All these international conferences are, usually referred to based on where they have been conducted. So another 2 legally binding instruments was the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, remember that the Rio Declaration is a part of the non-binding instruments, and the binding one was the UNFCCC and the CBD. Okay, secondly, another one that was mentioned in the list is the Basel Convention, 1989. This is basically, again, Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. So you could probably get a question that just mentions, Convention on Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and Disposal. Basel might be left out. So knowing the whole name of the convention becomes very, very important. Basel Convention has been repeated in a lot of question papers again. Most of the international environmental law related questions, basically you'll have like what the convention talks about or is related to in one list, and you have name of the conventions on the other. We'll be doing a couple of other questions later. So yeah, all you have to remember is that, the Basel Convention aims to protect human health and environment because of these hazardous waste. So it basically controls, like, if there's hazardous waste that is being generated in India, where will that hazardous waste go and be disposed of? So that is being controlled, because if wherever it is disposed, because it is hazardous waste, the place of disposal is going to be negatively impacted. So it controls and regulates this, that disposal must happen in a very environmentally sound manner. That is why you have to import, if I generate hazardous waste in India, and then if it is being disposed of in India, Basel Convention won't be applicable. Only if it's transboundary movement. If it is beyond India, I'm going to try and dispose my country's hazardous waste elsewhere, that is when this convention becomes applicable. Okay, and next we have United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is again in 1992 as a part that came into existence as a part of the Rio conference. And then this basically, the objective is to achieve stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous interference with the climate system. Okay, what happens with this particular convention, like a lot of other international environment agreements is that they have something called the Conference of Parties. It changes based on every convention, but under UNFCCC, Conference of Parties are held every year. Let's say, give an example of Convention on Biological Diversity. Conference of Parties happens every 3 years. Okay, so remember, Conference of Parties in UNFCCC happen every year, and each Conference of Parties, there could be a protocol that comes up, or an agreement, or a declaration. Every time, every Conference of Parties, they come up with a new declaration or a document that is applicable to all the countries that are a part of the United Nations Framework Convention. Okay, so now, important, Kyoto Protocol was the third Conference of Parties that happened, and because of this created a lot of difficulty for a lot of countries to ratify because of the difficulty in the process. Okay, it gave a lot of binding commitments. When you look at international law, we call it the soft law because of the lack of binding nature. But Kyoto Protocol had like a lot of binding commitments, and a lot of countries took a while to sign this protocol. So it entered into, came into being in 1997, but entered into force in the year 2005. That's almost 8 years after this. Otherwise, usually what happened in the Paris Agreement was it came into being in 2015, but entered into force in 2016 itself. Okay, so now what does Kyoto Protocol talk about? And generally, like the question, it is usually very simple, whether it's relating to climate change or something like that. But here, let's just have a basic idea. I think it's essential that we know what Kyoto Protocol talks about. So we have the protocol, otherwise through its schedules, divide the countries based on whether they're industrialized countries or economies in transition. Industrialized countries are your developed countries, and economies in transition are your developing countries. So they're supposed to limit and reduce greenhouse gas emissions based on their targets. Targets are set under the protocol, and they have to achieve targets, and the countries themselves are supposed to have policies within the country so that they meet the targets. One important thing is under this protocol, as well as the convention, UNFCCC convention, is common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. This is a very important principle in the climate change context, because the reason for climate change has been the developing countries for a while now. And a lot of developing countries are not, helping out the developing countries. So there is a common responsibility of all the countries to deal with climate change, but it is also differentiated based on the capabilities of countries to deal with climate change. So developing countries are going to have lesser amount of responsibility as opposed to the developed countries. That is what this particular principle talks about. So developed countries are supposed to have a higher target for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions as opposed to developing countries. Third is the Paris Agreement. Again, this was a part of COP21 that happened in 2015, and this basically decided that climate change is related to global warming, and then the Earth's surface temperature is rising. So the agreement basically decided on, at the end of the century, that is 2100, we have to ensure that the rise in the temperature has to be 2 degrees, and then otherwise we have to ensure that our other target is 1.5 degrees Celsius. In this particular, one thing that stood out is the fact that every country had to commit or come up with nationally determined contributions. Okay, like every country said that this is how I am going to contribute under the Paris Agreement for dealing with the climate crisis. And these contributions, goals are set, targets are set, and after every 5 years, assessment is going to happen. Okay. Now we go into the next thing. We've dealt with all the agreements that dealt with was in the previous question. Now we have the Bonn Convention is associated with option 1, International Whaling Convention, option 2, Convention on Nature and Natural Resources, option 3, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, option 4, Convention on Migratory Species.
Time has started.
This was again a question in December 2018 exam.
Thirty more seconds to go. Ten seconds. Time's up.
Okay, the correct answer is answer 4, the Convention on Migratory Species. Let us just learn a little bit about the Bonn Convention. This came into being in the year 1983. This again, important, very important. Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Remember this name of the convention as well. There are times it is called the CMS Convention because conservation of migratory species. What it does is it brings together a lot of states through which migratory animals pass, and then they lay legal foundation to coordinate so that these species are conserved. Okay.
Yes.
Next, we have another question. How many core principles are laid down in the United Nations Declaration of Permanent Sovereignty over Natural Resources? This is again another question that came in the June 2019 paper.
All right, time started. Fifteen more seconds to go. And time's up.
All right, the correct answer is 4. There are 8 core principles in this. Okay, let's just have a basic idea. This was the first time this question was spoken about. I couldn't come across this question again anytime in the previous year papers. So you'll have to know that it is not a declaration or a document per se, but this was a resolution that was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1962. Permanent sovereignty of natural resources. I just gave a snapshot of what, the fact that there are 8 principles. It talks about the fact that states have a right of sovereignty over the natural resources that are within their territory, and then how states can use it, develop it, dispose of the resources, and then how states might ensure that there is mutual respect among states if it's a resources that is being shared, and it also talks about how peace must be maintained if there is any conflict, oversharing of such resources, or if there are any violation of rights in this particular context. Okay. Next, we have question 8, the Sustainable Development Goals committed to provide universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services, improving the share of renewable energy, doubling the energy efficiency by 2030, protection of ocean and wetland.
Okay, time started. Thirty seconds to go. Ten more seconds. And time's up.
The correct answer is 1. A, B, and C are true. Okay, before we move on, you can realize that the first 3 options talks about renewable energy, 4th talks about protection of ocean and wetland. So let's get a brief idea of Sustainable Development Goals. This is related to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and this was adopted in 2015. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Let me just show you what these Sustainable Development Goals are. Okay, there are 17 of them. It would help to remember what these talk about. There has been a question otherwise in the general paper that on this particular topic. So it helps to know what they are. There's no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, partnership for the goals. Okay, when we go back to the question, you can see that we have one particular goal, affordable and clean energy. So the first 3 options fall under what they talk about clean energy. Okay, universal access to affordable, reliable and modern energy services comes under that particular goal. Improving the share of renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency. Each of these goals, they have sub goals. Okay, so these are the sub goals of the goal 7 of SDGs. Protection of ocean and wetland, it is very important that you don't get confused with those goals. Like for example, you have life below water. This basically talks about all the living beings underwater, so that does not equate to protection of oceans. They're only talking about life that is underwater. So you have to be very, very clear about what these goals talk about. That is why the answer is 1, which talks about the first 3 options, A, B, and C. Protection of ocean and wetlands is wrong. Okay, next. I think you guys can answer this question. We already dealt with this. This was again in November 2017. The previous question was again in the year June 2019. Basel Convention is associated with one of the following conventions on international trade in endangered species of wild flora and fauna, the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal, climate change, protection of ozone layer.
Time starts. Thirty seconds more to go. Ten seconds more. And time's up.
All right, the answer is 2. I mean, we already studied. It talks about the control of transportatory movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. Okay, next we have Montreal Protocol is associated with 1, you have climate change, 2, biodiversity, 3, ozone layer depletion, 4, hazardous waste.
Okay, time starts now. Yeah, we are receiving some of the answers. Animesh KS. Please try to answer these questions. Thirty more seconds. Five seconds. And time's up.
Okay, the correct answer is 3, ozone layer depletion. I think we also dealt with this in the one of the question that talks, which was the incorrect answer. It spoke about whether Montreal Protocol relates to hazardous waste. Okay, so here this Montreal Protocol came into being in 1987. Again, remember, it's Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, and it basically talks about, dealing what we are going to do about these ozone depleting substances, because after a hole in the ozone layer was found, all the countries came together and came up with this particular protocol. And what we must understand is that because of the dangerous realization, almost all 197 UN member states have ratified this particular protocol. Just know that there are chemicals that are mentioned in the protocol. They're called ozone depleting substances, and then when they are released, it affects the ozone layer. So to ban a couple of substances and regulate others, this protocol came into being in 1987. Okay, we also dealt with this under the Paris Agreement. So yeah, here goes the question. As per the provisions of Paris Agreement, the intended nationally determined contributions are to be reviewed every, option 1 is 15 years, option 2 is 10 years, option 3 is 5 years, option 4 is 3 years.
Okay, time starts. For this question, we are giving only 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody would know the answer.
$15 more seconds to go. And time's up.
All right, the correct answer is 5 years. like I mentioned, under the Paris Agreement, all the countries are going to decide how they're going to contribute. So these people, every country is supposed to take a global stock take about how much they have reached their targets, or they're going to revise it. And this process is going to happen every 5 years. Okay. Now, again, another match the following. I'm sure we have dealt with 3 of these. So let me read the question. On list 1, we have no state has the right to use or permit the use of its territory so as to cause injury by fumes in the territory of another. B is economic benefit must substantially exceed its environmental cost. C, the present generation has no right to deplete all the existing forest and leave nothing for the next and future generation. D, transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. On list 2, we have Basel Convention, Trail Smelter case, Environment Impact Assessment, and Intergenerational Equity.
Okay, time starts.
This was again a question in July 2018 question paper.
Yes, please try to answer. We are receiving answers from KS. Any other participant? We still have time. 30 seconds to go. We have received from answer from Vinita. Ten more seconds. And time's up.
Okay, the correct answer is 1. Like we discussed, no use transboundary harm principle is mentioned in list 1A, which is basically the Trail Smelter case that we discussed. Okay, moving on, part C on list 1 talks about present generations and future generations. We discussed this. It is intergenerational equity, and then transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal is the Basel Convention. So since you already know 3 of them, the one left out is the economic benefit must substantially exceed its environmental cost is the Environment Impact Assessment. Okay. All right. Right. Okay, this we have another, these are, this is again December 2018. Every year these kind of match the following questions come into being. So I've covered the ground of discussing all the topics. Right now we're just doing the previous year papers. So right now, please match the following. We have Trail Smelter case, Basel Convention, Earth Summit, Kyoto Protocol, and list 2, reducing transboundary movements of hazardous waste, climate change, preventing pollution and environment damage between nations, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development.
Okay, I'll provide 30 seconds for these questions now. Fifteen more seconds to go. Okay, time's up.
All right, the correct answer is 4. Like you all know, Trail Smelter case talks about preventing pollution and damage between nations, US and Canada. B is Basel Convention, which is 1, reducing transboundary movement of hazardous waste. Now, this is very important. Like I mentioned to you all, while dealing with Stockholm Declaration, okay, or the conference, or when I spoke about the Rio Declaration, we read that we are supposed to know the actual name of the conference. So Earth Summit and United Nations Conference on Environmental Development are both names for Rio Declaration. So they have connected the two different names of Rio Declaration in this particular list. Then Kyoto Protocol, as we know, is a result of Conference of Parties and under the UNFCCC, which deals with climate change. So that is your option 4. And this was a question that came in December 2018 paper. Okay. Now, again, a simple question. We dealt with this. I'm hoping you all can remember the number. The Polluters Pay principle has been incorporated in Principle 15, Principle 27, Principle 8, Principle 16. This was, again, this is an old question, however, but this was a question in June 2014 question paper.
Okay, time starts. Few more seconds and time's up.
Okay, the correct answer is 4, Principle 16. You have to remember under Rio Declaration 2 important principles. Principle 15 talks about precautionary principle and Principle 16 talks about the Polluters Pay principle. Next. I came up with this question particularly considering the June 2019 question paper because there were around 10 or 12 questions that refer to chronological order. So I thought it would be wise to just be prepared in this context. Try doing this. We have Rio Conference, Kyoto Protocol, Stockholm Declaration, and Paris Agreement. And please use the code below.
Right, time starts. I'm just giving 30 seconds for these questions now. Okay, stop.
Okay, the correct answer is 3. We have Stockholm Declaration that came in first, Rio Conference, Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. Okay, I have this was the last question. So before we stop, can I just take 2 minutes to just summarize everything that we have done, Anu?
Yes, sure, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So starting off, this is all that you have to study in the relating to international environmental law and the UN conferences. Just recapitulating, firstly, we started off with the Smelter case, where we basically discussed the case between US and Canada, and the principle that was discussed is the principle of transboundary harm and the Polluters Pay principle. Then we spoke about the principle of sustainable development, and the 4th principle is precautionary principle. The 5th one is the intra and intergenerational equity. So under principles, remember, Smelter case was one of the very first cases, and remember it's also called the arbitration because the case was decided through an arbitration. Principle of sustainable development, Polluters Pay principle, precautionary principle, principle of transboundary harm, intra and intergenerational equity. These are the principles. When we look at conferences, we start off with Stockholm Conference in 1972, and then we have the Rio Declaration that happened in 1992, and then these are the 2 important ones, and then you have the Montreal Protocol in 1987 that spoke about ozone layer depletion. We have Basel Convention that spoke about hazardous waste, transboundary movement of hazardous waste. With respect to climate change, we have Conference of Parties, specifically United Nations Conference on Climate Change that came into being in 1992, Kyoto Protocol in 1997, then Paris Agreement in 2015. Then in context of Bonn Convention, that spoke about migratory species that in terms of conservation. Okay, so if you have recapitulate all these conventions, I think in terms of learning international environmental law, you have studied exhaustively for the exam. So yeah.
Right. So thank you, ma'am, for sharing your wonderful insights with us. Also, I'll ask my participants if they have any question. So either they can raise your hand or you can write your query in a chat box.
Okay.
Archana, ma'am?
Yes, Anu.
Yes. So would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. The session was very delightful. It was very interesting also. So we have covered almost everything in international environmental law with whatever comes in the examination. So if anybody have any question regarding international environmental law, or you have not understood any of the concept, you can please ask the expert. So they will be happy to help you.
Yes. If anybody has question,
There's somebody who wants question 12 and 13. Is it okay if I share screen again and show it to them?
Yes, sure. Sure, you
one
can.
participant is asking about the question 12 and 13. Mr.
Yeah.
KS. Meanwhile, please participants rate this particular webinar from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. Please share your feedback with us.
Okay, this is question 12.
You can take a screenshot. Yes. Ma'am, question
13?
Yes. The correct option of 12th question is option 1. And 13th question, correct answer is?
Option 4.
Option 4. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Right. Please share your feedback with us, whosoever is attending this webinar as of now, from 1 to 10. And if you have any views, if you wanted to share with us. Okay, so now I'll sign off this session. It was wonderful session. And it was very, we have taken many of the questions from the past year papers. So those who are appearing for the UGC net law, and these questions will be very helpful for them. And next time we'll come up with some other interesting questions for you. So yes, thank you, ma'am, for joining, and thank you for your valuable time and efforts. And thank you, Archana, ma'am, for conducting this and organizing this particular webinar with us. Okay.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to add one thing that LawSikho has launched UGC Net Law course, and the live classes for it will be starting this week itself. So I would, if anybody is willing to give the paper of UGC Net in December attempt, so they can join our course and we can start our preparation accordingly.
Right. Yes. Yes, please. If you wanted to join, please check our landing page. That is available on the LawSikho. That would be very helpful. And all the best for their preparations. And thank you again for joining this session. Thank you, participants. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Now I'm sign off. Webinar
Thank
executed.
you. Bye.